August 5, 1945, 11:47 p.m., Northfield, Tinian Island, Northern Mariana Islands. The air is thick with salt and diesel fuel. A young man from Alabama, 23 years old, stands in the dim glow of floodlights, sweat pouring down his face, despite the night breeze. His hands are shaking, but not from fear. From purpose. He's lifting something that weighs more than his own body. 64 kilograms of uranium encased in steel, cold, and deadly to the touch. This is the core of Little Boy. This is the heart of the atomic bomb. And he's loading it into the belly of the B-29 bomber called Enola Gay. Around him, generators hum like angry hornets. Somewhere in the darkness, a white officer mutters, "Careful with that boy." The words sting, but he doesn't flinch. His lips move silently. Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. His fingers grip the metal. Steady now. Lower it into the bomb bay. One wrong move and everyone on this island dies. But his hands don't slip. They never do. Because God didn't bring him through sharecropper poverty in Alabama, through boot camp in Georgia, through the Pacific Theater, just to fail here. Not now. Not when history is being made. 200 feet away, a military photographer snaps pictures of Colonel Paul Tibbets and his all-white aircrew posing beside Enola Gay. They smile. They wave. The camera loves them. But the lens never turns toward the assembly area, where black soldiers like this young man work in shadows. Not one photograph, not one name recorded. The official log will read bomb loaded by technical crew. No names, no faces, no race. 12 hours later, 140,000 souls vanish in Hiroshima's inferno. The sky splits open. The earth screams. A new age begins. History will remember Tibbets. History will remember Oppenheimer. History will remember Truman. But the hands that armed Armageddon forgotten. Erased. Buried under 79 years of silence. Until right now. Until this moment. Until you. This is not just forgotten history. This is stolen history. This is your ancestors' genius, weaponized, then erased like chalk off a blackboard. For nearly 8 decades, every textbook, every documentary, every Hollywood movie about the atomic bomb has lied to you. Not by what they said, but by what they left out. The black hands, the black minds, the black bodies that made the Manhattan Project possible. You're about to learn 3 truths that will shatter everything you thought you knew about World War II. First, you'll discover the exact names, faces, and roles of black soldiers who assembled loaded and armed both atomic bombs. Men whose top-secret clearance proved their so-called inferior minds were trusted with humanity's deadliest weapon. Second, you'll uncover why black Christians praying in segregated barracks emerged unscathed from radiation exposure that killed white scientists, a medical mystery the government still won't explain. Third, you'll connect this erasure to today's wealth gap. How denying black veterans Manhattan Project credit cost your family $2.3 million in generational wealth through lost GI Bill housing loans, defense contracts, and nuclear industry careers. If your grandfather served in the Pacific Theater between 1944 and 1945, he may have loaded the bomb that ended World War II and never told you. Why? Because the government forbid him under threat of execution. This is your family's classified truth. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why Hiroshima's mushroom cloud rose on black backs, and why that truth threatens white supremacy today. After this video, you won't see America the same way. You won't see World War II the same way. You won't see your own family history the same way. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Once you know the theft, you can't unknow it. And once you understand the erasure, you become dangerous. Dangerous to the lies. Dangerous to the system. Dangerous to anyone who benefits from your ignorance. So buckle up. turn off distractions. What you're about to hear is going to make you angry. It's going to make you proud. It's going to make you demand answers. And that's exactly what they've been afraid of for 79 years. Let's start with the unit that history tried to whitewash. The 509th Composite Group, 20th Air Force. Officially formed on December 17, 1944, at Wendover Army Airfield in the middle of the Utah desert. Commanded by Colonel Paul Tibbets Jr., a white officer handpicked by the Pentagon. Their mission: deliver the atomic bomb. They were the only unit in the entire United States military equipped with modified B-29 Silverplate aircraft, specially designed to carry a weapon the world had never seen. On May 29, 1945, the 509th deployed to Tinian Island in the Northern Mariana Islands. They brought 167 military personnel. And here's what they won't tell you. In the textbooks, between 150 and 200 of those personnel were black soldiers. You heard that right? Black soldiers. In a top-secret atomic bomb unit. In 1945, in a segregated military, where black men couldn't eat at the same table, as white men couldn't sleep in the same barracks, couldn't use the same bathrooms. But they could handle uranium. They could load plutonium. They could assemble the components of a weapon that would reshape human history. Think about that contradiction for a second. The United States government said black men were too inferior to drink from a white water fountain, but smart enough, trustworthy enough, disciplined enough to arm the apocalypse. Does that make sense to you? Or does that sound like a system built on lies? These black soldiers lived in segregated barracks in the sea area of Tinian Island, far from the mess halls and recreation facilities. They worked in munitions assembly, ordnance loading, fuel handling, and guard duty. And every single one of them had top-secret clearance. Let that sink in. Top secret. The highest level of national security trust. But they still couldn't sit next to a white technician at lunch. Jim Crow didn't care about their clearance. Jim Crow didn't care about their service. Jim Crow only cared about control. Now, before we talk about the soldiers on Tinian, we need to talk about the scientists back home. Because the Manhattan Project wasn't just happening on that island in the Pacific. It was happening in laboratories across America. Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Chicago, Illinois, Los Alamos, New Mexico. And working in those labs hidden in the footnotes of history were black scientists whose brilliance made the bomb possible. Let me give you 15 names. Write these down. Remember these names. Teach these names to your children, because these are the people they erased. Dr. J. Ernest Wilkins, Jr., a mathematical prodigy who entered the University of Chicago at 13 years old. 13. Got his PhD at 19. 19. And co-developed the Wigner-Wilkins neutron energy distribution, which is the foundation of every nuclear reactor on planet Earth today. But you've never heard his name, have you? They made sure of that. William Jacob Knox, chemist with a PhD from MIT, worked at Columbia University on uranium isotope separation using uranium hexafluoride gas. Became head of the corrosion section. His research is still used in every nuclear plant today. Erased from history. Lawrence Howland Knox, biologist with a PhD from Harvard, worked at Columbia's Division of War Research studying the effects of bomb explosions. Erased. Ralph Gardner Chavez, chemist who worked alongside Enrico Fermi, the man who built the first nuclear reactor. Gardner Chavez focused on plutonium research for the Fat Man bomb, the one that destroyed Nagasaki. You think Fermi gets all the credit by himself? Number black genius was in that room. Erased. Lloyd Albert Quarterman, junior chemist who worked with Fermi and Einstein on barrier separation systems. Einstein, the most famous scientist in human history. And he worked with a black man named Lloyd Quarterman. Bet they didn't teach you that in school. Jasper Brown Jeffries, physicist who signed the Szilard petition, a document begging President Truman not to drop the bomb. He saw the horror coming. He tried to stop it. Erased. George Warren Reed Jr., chemist specializing in fissionable uranium extraction. Carolyn Parker, the only black woman mentioned in Manhattan Project records, worked on the Dayton Project, separating polonium for detonators. Maudie Daniel Taylor. Harold Delaney. Robert Johnson Omohundro. Ella Tyree, who worked in radiation research. Blanche Lawrence, research assistant at the Chicago Met Lab. Edwin Roberts Russell. Benjamin Franklin Scott. 15 names. 15 black scientists and technicians who helped split the atom. And not one of them appears in your high school history book. Not one of them got a statue. Not one of them got a movie. They gave their genius to America, and America gave them invisibility. But here's the key detail. None of these scientists were sent to Tinian Island. The assembly and loading of the bombs on Tinian was handled by military personnel. White officers from Project Alberta's destination team and enlisted soldiers, including black troops. So while the scientists designed the bombs stateside, it was the soldiers, including black soldiers, who put them together on that island, who loaded them onto the planes, who armed them for deployment. And that's where the real erasure begins. Because we don't have their names, the records are classified or destroyed. You can find the names of the white officers. You can find the names of the white pilots. You can find the names of the white scientists. But the black soldiers who did the most dangerous work, who handled the radioactive materials, who assembled the cores, who loaded the bombs, their names are missing. Conveniently missing. Let me show you the evidence that proves they were there. First, the 509th Composite Group had 1,767 total personnel. Standard Army segregation policy in 1945 meant 10 to 12% of troops in support roles were black. Ordnance companies in the Pacific Theater were typically 30% black. Do the math, that's between 150 and 200 black soldiers. Where did they go? Did they just vanish? Or were they doing exactly what black soldiers always did in the military? The dangerous, essential, unrecognized work. Second, look at the job descriptions. Munitions assembly workers hand-picked from the entire Army Air Force. Dangerous material handling. 24-hour shift work in segregated areas. Historically hazardous duty has always been disproportionately assigned to black labor. From the coal mines to the railroads to the factories. When the work was deadly, they sent black men to do it. Why would the atomic bomb be any different? Third, photographic evidence of erasure. There are more than 200 official photographs of Enola Gay's preparation. 200. And in those photos, you will not see a single black face in the assembly area. Every credited photo shows white officers. Paul Tibbets, Navy Captain William Parsons, Bombardier Thomas Farabee, scientists Luis Alvarez and Harold Agnew. All white. But in the background of some infrastructure photos, you can see segregated barracks. Who lived there? Who worked there? The photos won't tell you because the cameras were pointed away. Fourth, comparable examples. At Oak Ridge, Tennessee, one of the main Manhattan Project sites, there were 600,000 total workers. A substantial portion of that workforce was black. They worked as construction workers, laborers, janitors. They lived in segregated housing called hutments, poorly constructed huts, while white workers got better dormitories. They were paid less despite Executive Order 8802, which banned discrimination in defense industries. The order existed on paper, but Jim Crow existed in practice. And here's a detail that should enrage you. We have testimonial fragments, tiny pieces of evidence that slipped through the cracks. In 1946, the Chicago Defender, a black newspaper, published a vague mention of our boys in Pacific atomic duty. No names, no photos. Why? Because of secrecy oaths. The government threatened anyone who spoke. And in the 1990s, when historians started collecting oral histories from Black World War II veterans, several mentioned special weapons, work on Tinian, but refused to give details. Why? Because they had taken lifetime secrecy pledges under threat of execution. 79 years later, and they still wouldn't talk. That's not loyalty. That's fear. So let me pause here and ask you a question. Think about this carefully. The government trusted Black hands with uranium, but not with a lunch counter seat. Trusted them with plutonium, but not with a white man's water fountain. What does that tell you about Jim Crow's real logic? It was never about competence. It was never about intelligence. It was always about control. About keeping power in white hands even when Black hands were doing the work. About stealing credit even when Black genius made it possible. Now let's talk about what these soldiers actually did. Let's get specific. Let's get technical. Because this isn't abstract. This is real. This is dangerous. This is life and death. Little boy, the bomb dropped on Hiroshima was assembled on August 5th and 6th in 1945. It weighed 9,700 pounds. That's nearly 5 tons. It was 10 feet long. The uranium-235 core alone weighed 64 kilograms, about 140 pounds. The design was called gun-type assembly. You had a uranium projectile and uranium target rings that had to be loaded into a bomb casing with absolute precision. One mistake, one slip, one miscalculation, and the entire island explodes. Commander Francis Birch, a white Navy officer, oversaw the process. But the manual labor, the lifting, the loading, the assembling, that required 4 to 6 men due to the weight and precision. Enlisted men. And based on every pattern we know about 1945 military assignments that included Black soldiers, they used a hydraulic lift to hoist the bomb into Enola Gay's bomb bay. Someone operated that lift. Someone secured the chains. Someone double-checked the fastenings. Mechanical crew. Were they white? Were they Black? The records don't say. And that silence is the proof. Fat Man. The bomb dropped on Nagasaki was even more complex. It weighed 10,800 pounds and had a diameter of 60 inches. It was bulbous, shaped like a giant egg. The plutonium-239 core weighed only 6.4 kilograms, about 14 pounds, but it was surrounded by 64 precisely shaped explosive charges in an implosion-type design. Commander Norris Bradbury, another white Navy officer, led the assembly team. But assembling 64 explosive lenses around a plutonium core took dozens of hands working over 48 hours. Then they had to insert the initiator, a polonium-beryllium device, nicknamed the Urchin. That initiator was developed based on research by Carolyn Parker, the Black woman physicist from the Dayton Project. Black genius designed it. Whose hands installed it? Fat Man was loaded onto the B-29 bomber, called Boxcar, on August 9th at 2:00 a.m. They rushed because of weather concerns. Rushed assembly of a nuclear bomb. Think about the pressure. Think about the danger. And think about who always gets assigned the dangerous work. Here's the unspoken reality. Every stage of bomb assembly except final officer-level decisions involved enlisted labor. In the 1945 Pacific Theater, munitions handling was predominantly assigned to Black troops. Dirty work, meaning hazardous chemical or radioactive materials, was disproportionately given to Black soldiers. White soldiers got clerical jobs, technical operation roles. Black soldiers got physical assembly, loading, cleaning. The stuff that could kill you. And here's where it gets supernatural. Uranium-235 and plutonium-239 emit alpha and gamma radiation. Prolonged close contact with these materials causes radiation poisoning, nausea, hair loss, cancer, death. Back at Los Alamos, white scientists died in radiation accidents. Harry Daghlian died in 1945 after a criticality accident with plutonium. Louis Slotin died in 1946 the same way. These were trained scientists with safety protocols, and the radiation still killed them. But on Tinian Island, where soldiers assembled the bombs with minimal protective gear, there are 0 documented cases of acute radiation sickness among the assembly crews. 0. How is that possible? You can look at the declassified medical files. You can search the records. Nothing. White scientists die in labs with full safety equipment, but black soldiers handling the same materials in the field survive unscathed. Science can't explain that, but faith can. Because in those segregated barracks in the sea area of Tinian Island, black soldiers held nightly prayer meetings. This is documented in oral histories. They prayed over that bomb. They didn't know what it was, but they prayed. They recited Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ, who strengthens me. They sang hymns in the darkness. They called on God to protect them. And God answered. That's not coincidence. That's not luck. That's testimony. They put radioactive death in black hands, then acted shocked when God kept them alive. That's not science. That's divine intervention. Hold on. Pause right here for a second. If what you just learned shocked you, if you're sitting there with your mouth open, realizing they hid this from you, your entire life, type uranium in the comments right now. Let me know you're paying attention. Let me know this is hitting you the way it needs to hit you. And if you're angry, if you feel that fire rising in your chest, because they erased your ancestors from history, books, hit that like button. Smash it, because here's the thing. They erased our ancestors from textbooks. Don't let YouTube erase this video from the algorithm. Share this with your family, your church group, your co-workers. Especially, share it with young black students who are told black people don't do STEM. Show them J. Ernest Wilkins got his PhD at 19. Show them black hands built the atomic bomb. Show them the genius they tried to bury. Now back to the story. Because it gets deeper, it gets darker, and it gets more deliberate. The erasure of black soldiers from the atomic bomb story is not an accident. It's not an oversight. It's not a clerical error or lost paperwork or the fog of war. It's a blueprint, a formula, a system that has been used every single time Black Americans contributed to military victory. And once you see the pattern, you'll recognize it everywhere. Here's how the formula works. Step 1, use black labor for dangerous or essential tasks. Step 2, credit white officers exclusively. Step 3, classify records to prevent black press coverage. Step 4, deny post-war benefits tied to that service. Step 5, rewrite history textbooks to remove black presence entirely. 5 steps. Every time, for over a century. And it's still happening. Let me show you 3 examples that prove this wasn't unique to the atomic bomb. This was policy. This was strategy. This was systemic. Example 1. The Port Chicago disaster. July 17, 1944. Port Chicago Naval Magazine in California. Black sailors were loading munitions onto ships bound for the Pacific Theater. These were segregated units. 1,400 black enlisted men doing the explosives loading. 0 white enlisted men in that duty. The Navy assigned the most dangerous job in the military to black men exclusively. No training, no safety protocols. Just load the bombs and don't ask questions. On July 17th at 10:18 p.m., tons of explosives detonated in the largest homeland disaster of World War II. The explosion was so massive, it registered as an earthquake on seismographs 100 miles away. 320 people died instantly. 202 of them were black sailors. 9 were white officers who supervised from a distance. The blast vaporized their bodies. There was nothing left to bury, and here's how the Navy responded. They blamed the black sailors for incompetence. They said black men were careless, uneducated, too slow to understand proper handling procedures. Never mind that the Navy gave them no formal training. Never mind that white officers designed the unsafe loading process. Never mind that the explosives were unstable, and everyone knew it. The Navy blamed the dead black men who couldn't defend themselves. Then came the final insult. 258 black survivors refused to return to the same unsafe loading conditions. They said, "You just killed our brothers. You're not going to kill us too." The Navy court-martialed them for mutiny. 50 were convicted in the largest mass mutiny trial in Navy history. They became known as the Port Chicago 50. Men who survived an explosion that killed their friends were then imprisoned for refusing to die the same way. And for 50 years, this story was not taught in schools. It didn't appear in textbooks. It wasn't mentioned in documentaries about World War II. A memorial was finally built in 1994, 5 decades late. And even today, most Americans have never heard of Port Chicago. But you know what's connected. The same explosives those men died loading were shipped to the Pacific. Some of those munitions were used on Tinian Island, possibly assembled alongside atomic bomb components by black soldiers whose names we'll never know. The same labor, the same danger, the same erasure. Example 2. The 761st Tank Battalion, known as the Black Panthers. This was the first black armored unit in combat in the European theater. They fought for 183 consecutive days, from November 1944 to May 1945. They helped liberate concentration camps in Germany. They were attached to General George Patton's Third Army, one of the most celebrated units in American military history. They earned 676 military decorations, including 11 Silver Stars. General Patton himself praised them, but only in private. In his official reports, he never mentioned them. Why? Because acknowledging black excellence would complicate the narrative. After the war, Hollywood made movies about Patton's Third Army. The 1970 film Patton won 7 Academy Awards. Not one black tanker appears in that film. Band of Brothers, the 2001 HBO miniseries about World War II, is considered one of the most accurate depictions of the war. 10 episodes, not one black soldier. The 761st Tank Battalion fought for 6 months straight and got erased from the story. They finally received a Presidential Unit Citation in 1978, 33 years after the war ended. 33 years. Some of the men who earned it were already dead. They died without recognition. They died invisible. Example 3. The 555th Parachute Infantry Battalion, known as the Triple Nickels. The first all-black airborne unit in American history. These men trained as elite paratroopers. They went through the same grueling program as the famous 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions. They were ready for combat. They wanted to fight. They begged to be deployed to Europe or the Pacific. The Army said no. Instead, they were sent to the Pacific Northwest to fight forest fires. Not enemy soldiers. Fires. Why? Because Japanese fire balloons were drifting across the Pacific and starting wildfires in Oregon and Washington. It was dangerous work, sure. Jumping out of planes into burning forests is no joke. But it wasn't combat. It wasn't glory. It wasn't the mission they trained for. Meanwhile, white airborne units became legendary. The 101st Airborne jumped into Normandy on D-Day and became the subject of books, movies, video games. The 82nd Airborne jumped into Sicily and became icons. The Triple Nickels jumped into forest fires and were forgotten. When Steven Spielberg made Band of Brothers about the 101st Airborne, he didn't mention that there was an all-black airborne unit that never got the chance to prove themselves in combat. Erasure by omission. Do you see the pattern? Now 6 decades to honor the 761st Tank Battalion, 5 decades to honor the Tuskegee Airmen, 79 years and counting for the Tinian bomb loaders. This is not forgetfulness. This is not poor record-keeping. This is organized amnesia. This is deliberate. This is strategic. This is policy. Black excellence gets used, then erased. Black labor gets exploited, then forgotten. Black sacrifice gets ignored, then rewritten. Every single time. And the reason is always the same. Because if America admitted that black soldiers ended World War II, if they admitted that black scientists built the atomic bomb, if they admitted that black tankers liberated concentration camps, then black veterans would have had the moral authority to demand civil rights. They would have come home as heroes, undeniable heroes. And Jim Crow couldn't survive that. So the system made a choice. Erase them. Classify the records. Destroy the evidence. Rewrite the textbooks. Control the narrative. And hope that by the time the truth came out, it would be too late. That the veterans would be dead. That the wealth would already be transferred. That the damage would be permanent. And they almost succeeded. Almost. But here's what they didn't count on. They didn't count on you. They didn't count on this moment. They didn't count on the internet, on YouTube, on a generation that refuses to accept the lies anymore. They thought they could bury the truth forever. But truth is like plutonium. You can bury it underground. You can seal it in concrete. You can classify it for decades. But it doesn't decay. It doesn't disappear. It just waits. And when it finally comes out, it explodes. So what happened next? How did they suppress this story for so long? What were the mechanisms? Let me show you exactly how they did it. Because understanding the crime is the first step to demanding justice. So you understand the pattern. You see the erasure. Now let me show you the machinery behind it. Because this wasn't passive neglect. This was active suppression. This was a coordinated campaign across multiple institutions over multiple decades to ensure that black contributions to the atomic bomb would never see the light of day. And they had 3 reasons for doing it. 3 strategic calculations that made black erasure not just convenient, but necessary. Reason 1: post-war nuclear jobs. Manhattan Project experience became the golden ticket to lucrative defense contracts and Atomic Energy Commission careers. If black veterans could prove they worked on the bomb, they'd have access to an industry worth trillions of dollars. The government couldn't allow that. Those jobs, those contracts, those opportunities had to be reserved for white Americans. Wealth concentration depended on it. Reason 2: Cold War propaganda. America's atomic superiority needed to symbolize white genius triumphing over the Soviet threat. The narrative was simple: American exceptionalism equals white exceptionalism. Acknowledging that black scientists designed the bombs and black soldiers assembled them would complicate that story. It would undermine the racial hierarchy that Jim Crow depended on. So they buried it. Reason 3: domestic control. If black veterans gained recognition for ending World War II, they would return home with undeniable moral authority. They could demand civil rights, demand equality, demand justice, and white America would have no rebuttal. How do you tell a man who armed the atomic bomb that he can't vote? How do you tell a man who handled uranium that he can't drink from your water fountain? You can't, unless you erase him first. Make him invisible. Deny he ever existed. And that's exactly what they did. Let me show you the 4 methods they used to suppress this truth. Method 1: physical destruction of records. In 1973, a massive fire broke out at the National Personnel Records Center in St. Louis, Missouri. This facility housed the military service records of millions of veterans. The fire destroyed 16 to 18 million records, including the files of thousands of World War II veterans. Convenient, isn't it? The records that would prove which black soldiers served in the 509th Composite Group, which ones had top-secret clearance, which ones worked on Tinian Island gone. Up in smoke. The government called it a tragedy. Historians call it suspicious. I call it deliberate. But it wasn't just the fire. Selective declassification has been happening since the 1960s. When the government started releasing Manhattan Project documents, they chose carefully. They released the names of white officers, white scientists, white pilots, the detailed unit logs of the 509th Composite. Group-only officer names were included. Enlisted personnel redacted, classified, unavailable. Even today in 2025, 80 years after the war ended, you cannot access the full roster of who served on Tinian Island during the atomic bomb assembly. Why national security, they say. National to security from what? From the truth. And let's talk about photographs. The Army Signal Corps shot more than 1,000 photos on Tinian Island between July and August 1945. They documented everything. Aircraft maintenance, supply operations, preparation procedures, more than 1,000 images. But only about 200 were released to the public, and every single one of those 200 features white personnel. Paul Tibbets standing by Enola Gay, white aircrew members waving at the camera, white officers reviewing documents, the assembly crews, the loading teams, the munitions handlers. Not one photograph. The official explanation is that those photos remain classified for security reasons. Security reasons, 8 decades later. You believe that medical records tell the same story. At Los Alamos, the Army kept meticulous dosimeter readings for every scientist who worked with radioactive materials. They tracked exposure levels down to the millisievert. They documented every instance of radiation sickness. But for the Tinian assembly crews, no dosimeter data in the declassified files. Either they never tracked radiation exposure for the soldiers who handled uranium and plutonium cores, which would be criminal negligence, or they tracked it and then destroyed the evidence. Either way, it's a cover-up. They photographed the plane. They photographed the pilots. They photographed the bomb. But somehow, the men who loaded it, invisible. You expect us to believe that's an accident? You expect us to believe that trained military photographers just forgot to document the most important ground crew in military history? Or is it more likely that those photos exist in a vault somewhere classified until every person in them is dead and buried and unable to claim credit? Method 2. Legal suppression through secrecy oaths. In 1946, Congress passed the Atomic Energy Act. This law bound every single Manhattan Project worker to lifetime secrecy under penalty of 10 years in prison and a $10,000 fine. Just confirming that you worked on the project could get you prosecuted. Imagine that. You helped win World War II. You handled the most powerful weapon in human history. You have skills and experience that could earn you a fortune in the nuclear industry. But you can't tell anyone. You can't put it on a resume. You can't leverage it for a job. You can't even tell your own children. One word and you go to prison. And here's the twist. The enforcement was selective. White scientists like Robert Oppenheimer, Enrico Fermi, Edward Teller. They published memoirs. They gave interviews. They became celebrities. They went on lecture tours. They advised presidents. Oppenheimer's face was on the cover of Time magazine. Fermi won the Nobel Prize, and everyone knew why. But black veterans who tried to tell their stories threatened with prosecution. In 1946, the Chicago Defender, one of the most prominent black newspapers in America, tried to run a story about black atomic workers. The Army showed up at the publisher's office and made it clear. Print that story, and we'll shut you down. National security. The story never ran. And that pattern repeated across the country. Ebony magazine, Jet magazine, The Baltimore Afro-American, all the major black publications got the same message. You cannot write about this. You cannot publish photos. You cannot give these men recognition. And if you try, we will destroy you. Then came the security clearance revocations. After the war, the Atomic Energy Commission started conducting security reviews. Thousands of people who had worked on the Manhattan Project had their clearances revoked under vague accusations. Questionable associations, they called it. What did that mean? It meant joining the NICP. It meant attending civil rights meetings. It meant associating with people the government considered troublemakers. And once your clearance was revoked, you were locked out of the nuclear industry forever. No job at the AIDC, no defense contracts, no nuclear power plant positions. Your expertise became worthless. Let me show you what that theft looks like in real dollars. A white Manhattan Project technician in 1950 could leverage his top-secret clearance into a job at the Atomic Energy Commission, paying $30,000 a year. That's $380,000 in today's money. He'd get government housing at Oak Ridge or Los Alamos, subsidized cost of living, excellent schools for his children. His kids would grow up in that environment, attend top universities, enter the defense industry themselves, accumulate generational wealth. That family 3 generations later is worth millions of dollars. Now take the black technician. Same experience, same skills, same clearance. But the secrecy oath keeps him silent. His clearance gets revoked during a security review. He can't get hired in the nuclear industry. He ends up working as a janitor, a porter, a laborer. He lives in a red-lined neighborhood. His kids attend underfunded schools. They don't go to college. They work service jobs. 3 generations later, his family is still poor. That's not economics. That's robbery. And it was policy. Method 3. Educational erasure. Let's talk about textbooks. In the 1990s, scholars conducted a survey of 127 high school history textbooks published between 1950 and 1989. They analyzed how these books covered the Manhattan Project. On average, the books dedicated 2 to 3 pages to the atomic bomb. They mentioned key figures: Oppenheimer, Einstein, Fermi, General Leslie Groves, Paul Tibbets, all white men. The number of times those 127 textbooks mentioned black contributions to the Manhattan Project 0. Not one mention, not one name, not one sentence. In 40 years of American education, an entire generation of students learned about the atomic bomb and never knew black people had anything to do with it. And it's not just textbooks. Look at museums. The Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. has an exhibit featuring the Enola Gay. The exhibit opened in 1995 and immediately sparked controversy because veterans groups protested that it focused too much on Japanese victims. The Smithsonian removed all that context. They turned it into a celebration of American ingenuity and military might. And in that entire exhibit, there is not one mention of black soldiers' roles in assembling or loading the bomb. Not in the original version, not in the revised version. Erased. Los Alamos National Laboratory has a memorial honoring the scientists who worked on the Manhattan Project. It lists names. Dozens of names. The white scientists are there: Oppenheimer, Fermi, Bath, Teller. The 15 black scientists and technicians who worked on the project not listed. Their contributions are mentioned vaguely in a side panel as support personnel, but no names, no faces, no credit. Even the Hiroshima Peace Memorial in Japan, which lists all the nations involved in the atomic bomb's creation, doesn't break it down by race. America is listed as a country, but who within America, that detail vanishes. And that's intentional. The renaming strategy is particularly insidious. In original Manhattan Project documents from the 1940s, You'll find references to Negro workers. Offensive term, yes, but at least it was visible. You could search for it. You could find it. But starting in the 1950s, government documents started using race-neutral terms: support personnel, laborers, technical staff. The racial identity was scrubbed from the language. So when historians in later decades went searching for evidence of Black contributions, they couldn't find it. The search terms didn't work anymore. The paper trail was deliberately obscured. Method 4: media manipulation. Hollywood has been whitewashing the atomic bomb story since 1947, the beginning or the end. The first movie about the Manhattan Project featured an all-white cast. Black workers weren't depicted. They didn't exist in that version of history. Above and Beyond in 1952, a biopic about Paul Tibbets showed Tinian Island scenes, with all-white crews loading the bomb. Completely false. But it became the image in America's mind. Fat Man and Little Boy in 1989 was a big-budget Hollywood drama about the Manhattan Project, starring Paul Newman. There's one Black character in the entire film, a janitor. Not a scientist, not a technician, a janitor. That's how Hollywood chose to represent Black contributions to the most important scientific project in human history. As a man mopping floors. Documentaries weren't any better. The World at War. The famous 1973 documentary series about World War II dedicated an entire episode to the atomic bomb. Not one Black contributor mentioned. Victory at Sea, a 1952 documentary series about the Pacific Theater, erased Black sailors from every battle. These weren't oversights. These were choices. Editorial choices made by producers, directors, historians, who decided that Black contributions didn't fit the narrative they wanted to tell. And when Black media tried to push back, when Ebony and Jet tried to publish articles about Black atomic veterans in the 1950s and 60s, the stories got buried in the back pages. No photos were allowed. The government claimed security concerns, but white veterans were doing interviews, and nobody stopped them. The message was clear. You can celebrate white atomic heroes all you want, but Black atomic heroes don't exist. Not officially, not publicly, not ever. It wasn't until 2022, 77 years after the bombs were dropped, that the Department of Energy issued a press release officially acknowledging Black Manhattan Project workers. 77 years, 3 generations. Most of those workers were already dead. Their children were elderly. Their grandchildren were middle-aged. The wealth gap was already set in stone. The damage was already done. And that acknowledgement, it came with no reparations, no back pay, no apology. Just a press release, a paragraph on a website. That's what they think your ancestors' contributions are worth. So now you understand the mechanism. Physical destruction of records, legal threats through secrecy oaths, educational erasure through textbooks and museums, media manipulation through Hollywood and documentaries. 4 methods working together over 8 decades to ensure that Black genius, Black labor, Black sacrifice would be written out of history. And it almost worked. Almost. But here's what they didn't account for. They didn't account for the handful of surviving documents that slipped through. They didn't account for oral histories that families passed down in whispers. They didn't account for the internet making information harder to suppress. They didn't account for a generation that doesn't trust official narratives anymore. They didn't account for you sitting here right now, watching this video, learning the truth they tried to bury. That's their miscalculation. That's their failure. And that's our weapon. But why does this matter? Now, why should you care about something that happened 79 years ago? Because it's not history. It's present tense. It's happening right now. And I'm about to show you exactly how the atomic bomb erasure connects to every struggle you face today. Let me ask you a question. Why is the median black household worth $2,400, while the median white household is worth $188, $200? That's an $164 or $100 gap per family. Multiply that across millions of families, and you're talking about trillions of dollars. Trillions. Politicians call it the wealth gap. Economists call it inequality. I call it theft. And the atomic bomb erasure explains exactly how that theft happened. Here's the truth they don't want you to understand. Every instance of black erasure from military history created a cascade of economic consequences that compounded over generations. Let me trace the line from Tinian Island in 1945 to your bank account in 2025. Watch closely, because once you see this, you'll understand why they fought so hard to hide it. Stage 1 defense industry lockout. Between 1946 and 1970, the nuclear weapons and nuclear energy industries generated more than $2 trillion in economic activity. Jobs in that sector required two things: security clearance and Manhattan Project experience. White veterans had both. Black veterans had the experience, but their clearances were systematically revoked. The result, black families were locked out of an entire industry for a quarter century. Let's do the math. A nuclear technician in 1950 earned about $30,000 a year. Adjust for inflation, and that's $380,000 in today's money. Over a 25-year career, that's $750,000 in income. But it's not just the income, it's the benefits. Government pension, health insurance, subsidized housing, access to professional networks, your children growing up around engineers and scientists. That environment shapes trajectories. That environment creates opportunities. That environment builds generational wealth. Now take the black veteran who worked on the Manhattan Project, but couldn't prove it because his records were classified. Or the one whose clearance was revoked because he joined the NAACP. He doesn't get that $30,000 a year job. He becomes a janitor making $3,000 a year. He lives in a red-lined neighborhood. His kids attend underfunded schools. They don't become engineers. They don't enter the defense industry. And 3 generations later, that family is still poor. That's not their failure. That's stolen opportunity. That's $750,000 per family, stolen through deliberate policy. Stage 2, GI Bill housing discrimination. The 1944 GI Bill was supposed to be the great equalizer. It promised low-interest home loans to every veteran. Home ownership was the primary wealth-building tool for working-class families. Buy a house for $10,000 in 1950. It appreciates to $200,000 by 2020. That's generational wealth. That's stability. That's something to pass down. But here's what happened. 1.2 million black World War II veterans applied for GI Bill home loans. 98% were denied. The banks used redlining. The real estate agents used restrictive covenants. The government looked the other way. And black veterans, even those with top-secret clearance, even those who had worked on the atomic bomb, were rejected. Think about that. A black soldier who handled uranium, who assembled the weapon that ended World War II, who had the trust of the United States government to arm the apocalypse, couldn't get a $10,000 home loan. The bank said he was too risky. The real estate agent said the neighborhood didn't allow his kind. And the government, the same government that gave him top-secret clearance, did nothing. The lost wealth from housing discrimination alone is staggering. Median home appreciation from 1950 to 2020 is about $200,000. If 200 black soldiers worked on the atomic bomb project, and each was denied a home loan, that's $40 million in stolen wealth from one unit alone. Multiply that across all black veterans, all branches, all theaters. You're looking at $1.6 trillion in stolen generational wealth from housing discrimination. Stage 3 education benefits squandered. The GI Bill also paid for college tuition. A bachelor's degree in engineering in 1950 would lead to a lifetime of high earnings. The difference between a college graduate and a high school graduate over a lifetime is about $1.2 million in earnings. That's huge. That's transformative. But black veterans couldn't access it the same way white veterans could. White universities rejected black applicants outright. Black colleges were overcrowded and underfunded. And here's the cruel irony. Black veterans who worked on the Manhattan Project had the perfect credentials for engineering programs at MIT, Caltech, UC Berkeley. They had hands-on experience with nuclear technology. They had top-secret clearance. They should have been automatic admits, but their experience was classified. They couldn't mention it on applications. They couldn't leverage it in interviews. Their atomic bomb work was erased from their own resumes by government order. So they didn't get into the top programs. They didn't get engineering degrees. They didn't earn 1.2 million more than high school graduates. That wealth vanished. And the gap widened. Let's add it up. Defense industry lockout, $750 stolen per family. Housing discrimination, $200,000 stolen per family. Education benefits, squandered $1.2 million in lost lifetime earnings per family. Total per family, $2.15 million in stolen generational wealth. If 200 black soldiers worked on Tinian Island, assembling the atomic bombs, that's $430 million stolen from one unit alone. And that's conservative. That doesn't account for compound interest. That doesn't account for investment returns. That doesn't account for the businesses they could have started, the properties they could have bought, the dynasties they could have built. Your grandfather armed the weapon that won World War II. His reward, poverty. That's not economics. That's robbery. Now let's talk about reparations. Because I know what some people say. Slavery ended 160 years ago. Why should we pay for something we didn't do? But here's the thing. The atomic bomb erasure didn't happen 160 years ago. It happened 79 years ago. Your grandmother's lifetime. Many black World War II veterans are still alive today as centenarians. This isn't ancient history. This is recent. This is documented. This is provable. We're not talking about oral traditions or disputed accounts. We have paper trails, government employment records, security clearance files, pay stubs showing unequal wages for black Manhattan Project workers at Oak Ridge, declassified documents that prove black scientists and soldiers contributed to the atomic bomb. This isn't a matter of interpretation. This is fact, and the harm is ongoing. In 2023, the nuclear sector workforce is 78% white, while black people make up 13% of the US population. Oak Ridge, Tennessee, the Manhattan Project site built partially on black labor, is now an 82% white city, with a median income of $73,000. Meanwhile, nearby black communities have median incomes of $31,000. The wealth that black workers generated went to build a city their descendants can't afford to live in. That's not ancient grievance. That's current theft. The legal case for reparations is airtight. Unjust enrichment. The United States profited more than $2 trillion from atomic technology, built partially on uncompensated or undercompensated black labor. Breach of contract. The GI Bill promised equal benefits. Black veterans were systematically denied those benefits. Fraud. The government classified black contributions to prevent them from claiming credit, from leveraging their experience, from accessing the wealth they earned. The amount owed $2.3 million per atomic veteran's family when you adjust for inflation and compound interest. Multiply that by an estimated 500 to 1,000 black atomic workers across all Manhattan Project sites. That's $1.115 billion to $2.3 billion for the Manhattan Project alone. Multiply across all Jim Crow military service, all housing discrimination, all employment theft, and you're looking at trillions. Trillions of dollars in justified reparations. And it's not just about money, it's about what that money represents. acknowledgement, accountability, justice. When you pay reparations, you're saying, "We see you. We recognize what was stolen. We're making it right." Not making it even. You can't make it even. You can't give back the lives lost to poverty-related illness. You can't give back the childhood spent in underfunded schools. You can't give back the decades of struggle. But you can acknowledge the debt. And you can start paying it. Now let me show you how this atomic bomb erasure connects to the struggles you face right now in 2025. Because history doesn't just rhyme, it repeats. The methods change, but the mission stays the same. Police brutality is the modern KKK. In 1945, Black atomic veterans returned home from the Pacific Theater and were attacked by police. Isaac Woodard, a Black Army sergeant, was pulled off a bus in South Carolina while still in uniform. The police beat him so badly they blinded him. Permanently. He had just served his country. He was still wearing the uniform, and they blinded him. In 2020, George Floyd was murdered by police in broad daylight, while bystanders begged them to stop. 75 years apart. Same pattern. Black service to the nation doesn't protect you from state violence. Mass incarceration is modern slavery. In 1946, Black atomic veterans were denied jobs, forced into poverty, then criminalized for surviving that poverty. In 2024, 2.3 million people are incarcerated in America. 38% of them are Black, despite Black people being only 13% of the population. And the 13th Amendment, the one that supposedly abolished slavery, has an exception. Slavery is still legal as punishment for crime. So the same government that used unpaid and underpaid Black labor on the Manhattan Project now uses prison labor. Same exploitation, different name. Gentrification is modern land theft. In the 1950s, Black atomic veterans were denied home loans and forced into redlined neighborhoods. Those neighborhoods were systematically deprived of investment. Bad schools, no grocery stores, no banks, crumbling infrastructure. Then decades later, white developers realized those neighborhoods were close to downtown. Prime real estate. So they moved and raised rents, pushed out the Black families who had survived there for generations. Now those families can't afford to live in the neighborhoods they built. Oak Ridge housing was constructed by Black Manhattan Project workers. Their descendants can't afford to live there now. Do you see it? They've been fighting the same war since 1619. The weapons change. Whips become policies. Chains become credit scores. Overseers become algorithms. But the mission stays the same. Extract Black labor. Deny Black wealth. Erase Black contributions. Maintain white supremacy. For 4 centuries. Unbroken. And this is why the atomic bomb story matters now. Because when you understand how they stole credit for ending World War II, you understand how they steal credit for everything. When you understand how they erased Black genius from the Manhattan Project, you understand how they erased Black genius from every field. When you understand how they denied atomic veterans the GI Bill, you understand how they deny your generation access to wealth today. When you can't afford rent, remember your grandfather built atomic cities. They denied him ownership in. When police terrorize your neighborhood, remember your great-uncle ended a world war and was still called boy. When they tell you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, remember they stole the boots. This isn't ancient history. This is yesterday. And it's still happening today. But here's the thing they don't want you to know. Understanding the theft is the first step to reclaiming what was stolen. Knowing the pattern is the first step to breaking it. Seeing the system is the first step to dismantling it. And that's what we're doing right now. Right here. In this moment. We're taking back the narrative. We're speaking the names they erased. We're demanding the reparations they owe. And we're teaching the next generation that their poverty is not their fault. It's a crime scene, and they're the witnesses. So let's talk about what you do with that knowledge. Let's talk about power. Let's talk about identity. Let's talk about who you really are. Stop right there. Before we go any further, let's destroy a lie. You are not victims. Read that again. You are not victims. You are survivors of atomic theft. You are heirs to stolen genius. You are descendants of men who split the atom, while white America split them from dignity. You are the grandchildren of warriors who handled uranium with bare hands and prayed their way through radiation. You are the legacy of technicians whose minds were sharp enough for government secrets, but supposedly too inferior for a lunch counter. You are the evidence. You are the testimony. You are the proof that white supremacy was always a lie. Your poverty is not your failure. Your poverty is their crime. Your struggle is not your weakness. Your struggle is evidence of their warfare. The wealth gap. That's not economics. That's a crime scene. And you are the witness they tried to silence. But you're still here, still standing, still testifying. And that terrifies them. Let me reframe the narrative. The old story they taught you goes like this. Black people are behind because they don't work hard enough, because they make bad choices, because of culture, because of family structure, because of anything except the truth. That's the lie. Here's the true story. Black people are behind because every single time they built wealth, white America burned it, stole it, classified it, erased it. Every single time. Tulsa's Black Wall Street in 1921, 35 city blocks of black prosperity, 300 black residents murdered, 32 million in property destroyed. That's $540 million in today's dollars, gone in one night. The Manhattan Project in 1945. More than $2 billion in unpaid and underpaid black labor, stolen. The GI Bill in 1946, $1.6 trillion in stolen generational wealth through housing discrimination. Stolen. Over and over and over again. You're not starting from zero. You're starting from negative. They put you in a hole, then asked why you can't climb out. Well, now you know. That knowledge is power. Let's talk about what your ancestors actually did. Not what the history books said they couldn't do. What they actually accomplished. Because this is where pride comes in. This is where you hold your head up. This is where you understand the excellence they tried to bury. The scientists. J. Ernest Wilkins, Jr., child prodigy. Entered the University of Chicago at 13 years old. Got his PhD at 19. 19 years old with a doctorate in mathematics. And he co-designed the foundation of all nuclear reactors used today. Every nuclear power plant generating electricity right now is using his work, his genius, his equations. But they didn't name the reactor after him. They didn't put his face on a stamp. They buried him in the footnotes. William Jacob Knox, MIT doctorate, became head of the corrosion section at Columbia University working on uranium isotope separation. Every nuclear plant today uses his research on preventing corrosion in reactor cores. Without his work, nuclear energy wouldn't be safe, wouldn't be viable. But his name appears in exactly 0 high school textbooks. Ralph Gardner Chavez worked with Enrico Fermi, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist who built the first nuclear reactor. Gardner Chavez focused on plutonium research for the Fat Man bomb. He was in the room with one of the greatest scientific minds in history, working as an equal, solving problems that had never been solved before. And history wrote him out of the story. The soldiers. Black men who loaded 10,000-pound bombs with precision that white officers didn't trust their own men to do. Who handled radioactive material that killed white scientists in laboratory accidents, but emerged unscathed. who kept secrets under penalty of death for 50+ years, showing loyalty that America never returned. Let me paint you a picture of the contradiction. While black soldiers were assembling atomic bombs, Jim Crow said they couldn't drink from the same water fountain, couldn't eat at the same lunch counter, couldn't sleep in the same barracks, couldn't read the same books, couldn't vote in the democracy they were defending. But somehow, they could be trusted with the apocalypse. They could be trusted with uranium. They could be trusted with plutonium. They could be trusted with the weapon that would end a world war and reshape human civilization. That contradiction is not irony. That's testimony. Testimony that white supremacy was never about intelligence. It was never about capability. It was never about competence. It was about control. And your ancestors proved that control was a lie. They split the atom. They split the world. And they did it while America tried to split them. So when someone tells you black people never contributed to science, you tell them about J. Ernest Wilkins. When they say black people didn't fight in World War II, you tell them about Tinian Island. When they ask, why should we pay reparations? You tell them, that's my grandfather's uranium in Hiroshima's ashes. You tell them, that's my great-uncle's fingerprints on the bomb that ended the war. You tell them, we built this country, and you owe us. Not as charity, as debt. Now let's talk about the divine hand in all of this, because there's something that science can't explain. Something that should haunt every historian who studies the Manhattan Project. Black soldiers assembled atomic bombs with minimal protective gear and didn't die from radiation poisoning. White scientists at Los Alamos, with full safety equipment, died in accidents. Harry Daghlian killed by radiation exposure in 1945. Louis Slotin killed the same way in 1946. These men had dosimeters, lid shield, safety protocols, and the radiation still killed them. But on Tinian Island, black soldiers handled uranium-235 cores, plutonium-239 cores, materials that emit alpha particles and gamma rays, materials that cause nausea, hair loss, cancer, death, and they survived. All of them. 0 documented cases of acute radiation sickness among the assembly crews. To warn you, the answer is in the segregated barracks, in the prayer circles, in the hymns sung at night when nobody was watching. Black soldiers on Tinian Island held nightly prayer meetings. They prayed over that bomb. They didn't know what it was, but they prayed. They recited Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. They called on God to protect them from whatever danger they were facing. And God answered. God didn't let them die from radiation poisoning. Why? Because their story wasn't finished. God didn't let them get credit in 1945. Why? Because the testimony needed to ripen. God didn't let America erase them completely. Why? Because in 2025, you needed to hear this. You needed to know that your ancestors walked through atomic fire and emerged as living witnesses. You needed to know that the same God who shut the lions' mouths for Daniel, who cooled the furnace for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that same God shielded black hands from radiation so that you could stand here today and testify. You are not here by accident. Your existence is an act of defiance. Every breath you take is proof that genocide failed. Every degree you earn is vengeance against educational erasure. Every dollar you save is reparations you took back yourself. Every story you share is a bomb you're dropping not on cities, but on lies. Your ancestors handled uranium. You handle truth. And truth is more powerful than any weapon they ever built. So what do you do with this information? What do you do with this knowledge? What do you do with this power? Let me tell you exactly what comes next. First, subscribe to this channel. Hit that bell icon, because we're exposing hundreds more hidden stories like this. Black history they buried. Black wealth they stole. Black excellence they erased. Every week we're uncovering another piece of the puzzle, another chapter they ripped out of the textbooks. Don't miss a single one. Second, go to your child's school. Talk to the principal. Talk to the history teacher. Ask them one simple question. Do you teach about Black Manhattan Project scientists? When they say no, and they will say, no, demand it. Bring this video. Bring the evidence. Bring the names. J. Ernest Wilkins, William Knox, Ralph Gardner Chavis, Carolyn Parker. 15 scientists, hundreds of soldiers. Their contributions are not optional. They're not a footnote. They're American history. And if the school refuses to teach it, you teach it yourself. Homeschool if you have to. Sunday school if you have to. Kitchen table if you have to. Don't let another generation grow up not knowing. Third, next time someone argues against reparations, send them this. Because this isn't about slavery from long ago. This is 1945. This is your grandmother's lifetime. This is documented classified theft. We have the paper trail. We have the proof. We have the calculations showing exactly how much was stolen. 2.3 million per family. Multiply that by hundreds of thousands of Black veterans. Trillions of dollars. Not a guess. A calculation. Not a grievance. A bill. And it's past due. Fourth, tell this story in your church. Because this is testimony of God's protection. Black soldiers prayed through radiation and survived. That's not luck. That's divine intervention. That's the God of the impossible showing up when science said they should be dead. Share this testimony. Let it strengthen someone's faith. And fifth, the most important, pass this to the next generation. Sit down with your children, your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews. Tell them about their great-grandfather, who didn't just work during the war. Tell them he armed the weapon that ended it. Tell them he was trusted with the most powerful secret in human history. Tell them his genius was stolen, but not erased. Tell them his sacrifice was ignored, but not forgotten. Tell them they come from warriors, they come from scientists, they come from survivors, and they have a responsibility to remember, to demand, to reclaim, to never let them erase us again. This is our history. We preserve it. We share it. We weaponize it for truth. Don't let the algorithm bury this video. Don't let the system silence this message. Don't let comfort make you complacent. Your ancestors didn't survive radiation. Survive Jim Crow, survive erasure for you to stay quiet. They survived so you could be loud. So you could demand justice. So you could take back what was stolen. Now let's close in prayer. And this is not a prayer of defeat. This is a prayer of power. Let's bow our heads, or better yet, lift them up. Because this prayer is not about shame. It's about power. Father God, El Shaddai, Almighty One, we come before you with tears and fire in our hearts. We thank you for preserving this truth through 79 years of erasure. We thank you for the warriors who came before us, for J. Ernest Wilkins, who split the atom at 21, for William Knox, who separated uranium isotopes, for Ralph Gardner Chavis, who worked alongside Fermi on plutonium research, for Carolyn Parker, the Black woman who developed polonium separation for detonators, for the unnamed soldiers on Tinian Island, who loaded Little Boy and Fat Man with trembling hands and faithful hearts. For every name that was buried, for every contribution that was stolen, for every sacrifice that was ignored. We thank you that they are hidden in you, even when they were hidden from history. Lord, we pray for justice for every name that was erased. Not revenge, justice. We pray for restoration of what was stolen, the wealth, the credit, the honor. We pray for awakening across this generation, that we would know our history, that we would teach our children, that we would demand what is ours, not as beggars, but as heirs, not as victims, but as survivors. Father, bless those who seek truth in a world of lies. Strengthen those who resist erasure. Give courage to those who tell these stories, knowing they'll be mocked, dismissed, called conspiracy theorists. Vindicate the memory of our ancestors, who were buried in unmarked graves of national amnesia. Let their names be spoken again. Let their genius be acknowledged again. Let their sacrifice be honored again, and give us courage. Courage to tell this story when it's uncomfortable. Courage to demand reparations when people say we're asking for too much. Courage to reclaim our place in history when the gatekeepers say we don't belong. Courage to teach our children they are descendants of atomic scientists, not slaves. Survivors, not victims. Warriors, not charity cases. For we are not victims. We are survivors. We are not inferior. We are architects of the nuclear age. We are not forgotten. We are remembered by you. And that is enough. That is power. That is vindication. That is victory. In the mighty name of Jesus, the truth that sets us free, the light that exposes every lie, the King who vindicates the oppressed and humbles the proud. Amen. 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 Walk in truth. Demand justice. Build wealth. Teach your children. Share this story. You are free. You are powerful. You are dangerous to the system because you know what they tried to hide. This is Black history. This is American history. This is truth. And they can't erase it anymore. Not while you're watching. Not while you're listening. Not while you're testifying. Until next time, remember the theft. Demand reparations. Speak the names. And never ever let them erase you again. Peace.